Good morning, everyone. Just want to say hi. I know I am not Mr. Lee Bellotta, who normally kicks this thing off every morning, but just wanted to say welcome to another webinar here. We are super excited to have you, and we're excited to answer your questions. Remember that you can always put them in the chat. Here on Zoom, or we are live on YouTube this morning. Facebook was giving us a little bit of an issue, but we will take your questions over there as well. Before we get started, let's just open up in a word of prayer, and then we'll introduce our panelists. Dear God, we just thank you so much for your love and your grace, Lord. We say thank you. Some days it's hard to wake up and say thank you. Just with the season that we are in, there are so many things that from man's eye that could be going better, but we know that you are on the throne. We know that you are in control. And God, we give this time to you. We pray that it would be beneficial. We pray for encouragement. We pray that you would give us creativity, and God, that our conversation here would be fruitful. And Lord, we honor you and we give you praise. So this morning, I want to welcome all of our awesome panelists. We have a good group for you today. Most of these faces you've probably seen before, but if we can just go around the room here, I would love to have us introduce ourselves, and we'll start with Dom Garcia. How you doing?
Good. Thank you so much, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back. Excited to discuss post-production, the invisible art, as I think pretty much everybody calls it. I'm excited because, again, there's so much when it comes to this area of content creation. Obviously, cinematography is essential, but really it's the ability to put it all together, package it, and send it out that's hopefully going to engage your audience. Again, you have an amazing group here. I'm excited to hear from them because, again, my area is mostly video in regards to like take one, take two, take three, and having a lot of time in post. But when you're dealing with live, it's a very, very different energy, a different space. And I think it's going to be exciting to see what we discuss. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Dom.
Well, I'm Nick Mayo. I was here, I think, 2 weeks ago, and I'm thrilled to be here again. This is great. This is an incredible group of people. But to introduce a little bit about myself, I'm one of the content creators at Black Bar. You'll hear more about that probably from some of the other panelists, but I'm also the video specialist at Grand Rapids First Church. I take care of a lot of our video creation and the marketing department there. I do a lot of similar things to what Dom just described, and I do some volunteering in our live production department as well.
Awesome.
I am Caleb. I am the media marketing director at the same church, Grand Rapids First in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm also a content creator at Black Bar, which is a digital media ministry devoted to helping people understand how to use these digital media communication tools to spread the gospel. So yeah, excited to be here.
Hey, everybody. My name is Dan DeRogers, and I currently serve as the creative arts pastor at Connection Church in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. Previously, I served with Assemblies of God World Missions in the Europe region, and then also was one of the founding faculty members in the digital media program at the University of Valley Forge. Great to be here with you all. And please remember to ask your questions in the Q&A section or in the chat. We'd love to address as many of them as we can this morning in the webinar. Zach.
Hi, I'm Zach Snyder, and I am not the director of 300 or Justice League, and I will not be releasing the Zach Snyder cut. Thank you very much. I am the final third of Black Bar, and speaking of people in Black Bar, it is Caleb's birthday, so make sure to wish him a happy birthday.
Yeah.
And outside of that, I'm the video director at Lifehouse Church in Hagerstown, Maryland. So pretty much my responsibility outside of the giant responsibilities that come with ministry that aren't on your job title. I create video content, promotional content, bumper content, as well as leading the live production team on the weekends. So that's me.
You guys so much, and I'm Tim Jackson. I'm a professor at the University of Valley Forge, and so happy to be here with some of my good friends and colleagues and former alumni and the Black Bar crew today. They have been killing it over there on their channel. If you haven't checked them out yet, you can find them at Black Bar over at YouTube. Those guys are making some amazing content, especially for this season that we are in. So just to kick it off this morning, I guess the question that is kind of looming over everyone is kind of like, what are some questions that you're asking when you're producing your live stream? Like, yes, for post-production, but also in production, preparing for post. So what are some questions you guys are asking?
One question that I'm asking and that our pastoral team is asking and we have asked throughout this entire process is, what does an online, at this point, what does an online only service look like? What elements are we including? What elements are different for an online service only? And then looking at a phased reopening, what does it look like for us to host services that maybe are 50-50 for a little while, that are both intended for an online and a somewhat limited in-person audience? And then, of course, what will it look like for us to move into where we're kind of back banging on all cylinders live? What will our continued digital presence look like? And I've mentioned it before in the context of these webinars. My church, we had a podcast and a website prior to the pandemic. And this, of course, like many of you, has really launched us into getting into the video realm, into taking streaming seriously. And now we're looking at what is the sustainability of continuing this digital ministry when we can meet in person.
Absolutely. That's a great question to be asking. Caleb, Nick, how about you guys over there, Grand Rapids?
One of the things that we've talked about before is, especially on the Black Bar channel, that when we're discussing what you want to produce, we want to ask the question, what story are you trying to tell? For us right now at Grand Rapids First, I think one of the things we're trying to talk about through our shots and what we're filming is kind of a more intimate, close service with our pastor and with our worship team.
Awesome.
I think there are 3 questions that I use for, I think, literally everything I've made in the past 5 years that I ask myself, whether that's a flyer or live production or video or website or whatever. The first question, I think the most important question you can ever ask is, who is your audience? Knowing exactly who that person is, not just, I like to narrow it down to a single person if I can. What do I want them to feel at any given time? And then what is it about whatever that is that I'm selling or doing or making that sets it apart, that makes it different and unique? And if I found that if I can answer all 3 of those questions, then I can make a much more targeted, awesome, focused piece of work. And I don't think those questions are incompatible with every decision we make in a live stream or a pre-recorded service environment. I think knowing who your audience is, knowing simply just the makeup of your church, or if you're doing a youth service or a kid service or whatever, knowing exactly who it is that we're tailoring that content for. What do you want them to feel? There's a different feeling if you're playing like Oceans or How Great Thou Art or whatever, right? And we can use different languages, either that be obviously a musical one, but also, as all of us being to some extent or another video people, a cinematography language to communicate a similar sort of thing. There's a lot of different languages, a lot of different tools we have available to us that I think now that we're talking about an online environment, we've beat the dead horse over and over again. These are 2 different mediums that we're talking about, an in-person service and the online environment. Now that we're in that online environment, there isn't really a set, absolute, perfect standard. We have the freedom to experiment and to try new things, and churches are going to come up with different conclusions because their answers to the 3 questions of who is your audience, what do you want them to feel, and what is it that sets you apart are going to be different answers. And that's cool and that's exciting. And I think that's what makes the body of Christ so fun, because there's a lot of different facets to the same picture that we're painting here. So my challenge for everybody would be to ask that question of yourself, of your audience, of your service, of what you're trying to communicate. And then hopefully as you've watched through the webinars and continue to learn about these different tools that we have available to us, all of these, as much as they are video tools and audio tools and design tools or whatever, primarily they are communication tools, and they are telling a story and they are saying something, just as much. They are very thoroughly, I'd say, equivalent to nonverbal communication. So, I mean, they're powerful tools, and I'd love to see how the church body can use those in one way or another.
Caleb, can I ask you a follow-up question to that?
No.
Okay, moving on. I'm thinking about a pastor, maybe in a rural context, maybe in a small church environment, a pastor who's just getting started, maybe using an iPhone, maybe just bought a camera, right? I guess my question is, how can someone who doesn't have the education that you have, who doesn't have the background that many of the panelists, all of the panelists here have, how can the pastor ask the questions that you're asking and provide meaningful improvement? And this would be a question open for everybody. I'm just thinking, like, if a pastor is doing something and the message is getting out, and maybe the people that they're attempting to reach, or the people that they are maybe going to try to reach, how do they evaluate when their audience can't provide them meaningful feedback, right? I mean, I think meaningful feedback when you're in this emergency mode is, I can't hear you, right? Or when you look at it and you're completely backlit and they can't see your face. Like, those are things that I think we can all just objectively see and make an improvement. But when it comes to sort of these more, in some cases, softer things, or, is my angle appropriate? Is my setting appropriate? What are some things that pastors can ask themselves to make improvements where they're not necessarily getting that quantitative feedback to help them make those improvements?
I think it'll depend on whichever. I mean, that could have gone to anybody, so I was just waiting to see if anybody else picked it up.
Sure.
I think I think so. The three questions that are my questions that I use all the time, I think those can be answered by anybody, which is cool. I think that's exciting. Who is my audience? What do I want them to feel? And what is it that sets us apart? I think anybody can answer those questions. The next is, in the same way that you put a paintbrush in my hand and I'm going to have no idea what to do with it, but you put it in the hand of a painter and they can do something beautiful. It's if you're not familiar with the cinematography, camera speak, and what you can communicate with audio or with lighting or anything, it could be difficult to get in that to the first place. I know one thing that has been helpful just for me to learn that stuff, as much as, obviously going to the University of Valley Forge and learning that along the way, is looking at what the pros are doing, whether and other church live streams is not a bad place to look. But if you're looking for editing and audio and camera shots and that kind of stuff, I mean, movies have been working on this for 100 years, if not more, right? Looking at, okay, like if I'm trying to communicate a serious tone, going to a movie that has a scene that has a serious tone, what are they doing with that camera? What it is, when you look, I would even go so far as to pause on a shot. I was like, I wonder why they framed it like this, or I wonder why they put that in the background, or I wonder why whatever. And that intentional observation is going to give you more tools in your tool belt for eventually when you're framing that shot. So a lot of us are obviously limited on the amount of cameras that we have, the amount of volunteers that we have, the production value that we can do. But even something as simple as framing where your single one camera is can communicate a very empty sanctuary or a very focused picture of your pastor, what he's trying to communicate. And I'm not going to say that either of those is wrong, because you might be trying to communicate an empty, that might be valuable to a point that's being made at the time, right? That's why it's important that we get those three questions down in the beginning. But I mean, I know that's how I learn, is just by absorbing from media sources that I take in.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest the same thing, like looking and it's not about comparing yourself and like beating yourself up and saying like, I'm not that good, right? It's not about that, but it's literally taking other people's perspectives, and you're like, oh, that looks good, that looks good. How can I make mine look more like that with the resources that I have? I've constantly found that in my own life where, yeah, I don't have the same amount of resources, but I do my best to step it up a little bit. And we've been talking about this every week. Like, what is one incremental change that you can make to keep moving forward? And I think the first step is, yeah, looking and seeing what other people are doing, what looks good, what doesn't look good. And we actually have a question here in the chat that I would love to get to from Kevin. He says, what if your audience is an aging congregation, yet you also are trying to reach a younger online audience? So you're trying to support, the elder folks in your congregation, but you're trying to reach a younger online audience. What would you guys say?
It's there's a saying that our pastor has when he talks about introducing change into the congregation, and he says that he has to disappoint us at a rate that we can absorb, which I think is an immensely powerful statement. I think if you jump cold turkey into really fast shots, bright colors, new music, all that kind of stuff, to try to engage a younger audience, you're going to disappoint your current audience at a rate that they cannot absorb, right? People don't fear change, they fear loss most of the time. They feel like they're losing a certain part of whatever it is, a culture, an important culture point of their church, or whatever. And I think, although encouraging people to progress and make their stuff more updated and more clean and engaging that younger audience, I don't think that's a bad thing for most churches to do. But I wouldn't encourage anybody to just jump. I think it does need to be a slow, gradual process and a constant evaluation of who am I trying to reach, and because that's a moving target as well. but what is the pulse of the current people that we have, and how can we be pulling them along for the ride?
Yeah, and I think the difficult thing about the digital realm is that now we're looking at different metrics. We're looking at different ways to measure that, because previously we could look out into our audience and we could see Mr. and Mrs. Johnson in the back row who have been coming diligently for 50 years, and then we can automatically pick out the brand new 20-year-old that just came with his wife and new child today. Like, that's a really easy metric. It's really easy to have a conversation with them. But whenever we're considering and thinking about the online church, that's when those metrics and those identifications change in a drastic way. And I think that's the hardest part for us, whether you're a pastor or you're working in ministry or you're working in the tech field or creative field, is that we now have to adapt and learn and understand how to get that feedback digitally. And we have to get that feedback from people using things like YouTube analytics, Facebook analytics. And even just me saying analytics could have just made you straighten up and tense a little bit. Like, what in the world are analytics? What in the world are, targeted ads? These are all things and tools that really aren't terribly difficult, but they are kind of an essential part of existing and living online. Because I think so far what this season has produced is that we're all surviving. Even a lot of the bigger churches, like I've gotten the opportunity to just talk to people from Life Church, and I've been a couple of webinars with people from Elevation and Bethel, and they're even saying that even though they're prepared well for this season, they still have to understand and adapt to the current situation. So for most people, especially those that aren't Life Church or Elevation Church, we're surviving right now. So I think we're transitioning to the point where hopefully you're online at this point. Hopefully you haven't quite missed the train, because there's been a lot of weeks that we've been without congregations and physical meetings. Now we're getting to the point where we're asking these questions in order to learn how we can thrive online. Because until you start to transition your mentality to just doing what needs to be done to survive to how can I better reach people online, that's going to be helpful. And that's the hard part about this aging congregation to younger congregation question, is because it's two very different demographics. You could be looking at boomers compared to millennials. Mm-hmm. They've had drastically different life experiences. And now you're trying to figure out what's the best way to bridge a 2, 3, 4 millennial gap between different ages. And that's going to be the hardest part. It's not unaccomplishable. You can do it. It's just going to require work, and you start to have to learn how to ask the right questions. You have to understand where people are going and where your congregation is centralizing around.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, as you said, Zach, like looking at those digital analytics, like trying to get that feedback digitally. I think one thing that we do need to remember, especially with our elders in our congregation, is that they are a phone call away. Like I know this week we had a church meeting just asking, "Hey, how are we doing? Are we reaching people? What's been going on?" And a couple of the elders who are a part of our board and our team, they weren't able to join the Zoom meeting, and so it was like, "Well, hey, let's get them on the phone. Let's call them in." Like you have to find a way to engage those people, and sometimes it's, you find one or two that are having problems, and if you're able to provide a service to get them online or get them involved, it's a lot easier to bring everyone else in that age and demographic along with those two people, because then they're able to collaborate and be like, "Hey, I found out how to get on. Here's the phone number. Here's the link. Like, here's how you do it." And they can kind of help speak each other's language a little bit better than you could, being a part of a different age group. So moving on to a little bit more specific on our topic today of post-production, two questions. What are you doing, and what are you not doing? I think that can be a topic for the rest of this conversation, but just want to put that out there. So what are you doing and what are you not doing?
Yeah, so for us at Lifehouse, probably one of the biggest things that our pastors, well, there's been a lot of change. So there's a lot of things that he's pushing into. But one of the biggest things right now that most directly affects the creative team is we're reducing our service times. That's been a big thing that we've been trying to figure out. That's actually pretty difficult because we're used to having 4 songs. So basically, we have a pre-service, we have a welcome, we have 3 songs, we have announcements, we have a bumper, we have a message, we have a raise to life moment, we have a last song and a closing. So that sounds like a lot, but that's a pretty stereotypical church service in the modern church when it comes to, like, the middle range of conservative churches, I'd say. But the difficulty is that we are, since we're online, we are now in a competition for attention. There are so many things that we are competing with, especially when our people are watching on a weekend service. So before, I think as a creative team, it's kind of like in scripture in Exodus in the time of Moses, where people would craft and create the temple. There's very specific specifications. There's very specific things that were needed to craft kind of this keeping space of the Holy Spirit. In a way, that's what creatives get to do. We get to craft an atmosphere. We get to develop this environment. We have the ability to control that, not manipulate, but control that in a way that fits with our giftings. But now that people are on the line, they're no longer in the environment that we've crafted. So we can no longer, let's say people on their phones during church service. That's could be a taboo. I know we have notes and such now, but if someone takes out their phone or starts talking to someone next to them loudly, those are all taboo things. Now, all that's been eliminated. When you're watching on a Sunday morning at home, you've probably got whatever's on your phones. You've got kids to deal with. You might have a game on in the background. Your kids could be playing video games. You could be having extra conversations with your family. Like, you're now competing for the attention of the service. So for us, that's been a big and important central point, because we're having to figure out, at least our mindset right now is we've seen a drop off after 50 minutes in a service. So normally our services are about an hour 15, give or take. We're reducing intentionally down to about 50 to 55 minutes because we've seen the analytics drop off. We're also trying to figure out how we can develop and increase engagement in the service on the stream, because numbers in the season are confusing because they're important, but they're not the most important. I think the most important thing you can do right now is engagement. It's the likes, the comments, the shares, the interactions. Those are going to show you who the people are that are most engaging with your content. And you want to be able to engage with them as well. So whether that's pastors engaging with people from stage or asking them to type in, respond to this moment or say this along with me, those are all things that we're transitioning to that we didn't have before. And I'm already in conversations that I know that's not going away anytime soon, even after this crisis is over.
In regards to the competing for attention sort of thing, in addition to all the other stuff you have going on in the house, you're also competing for attention now to anything else I could be watching at the time I could watch Netflix, I could watch YouTube, I could watch anything. And I think again, so the three questions I know, and I'm going to just bring it up and over again. My three questions: who's your audience? What do you want them to feel? What sets you apart is going to be the key to getting people to stay into your service. Why should I watch your service? I mean, in on a Sunday morning environment, this isn't a question we really have to ask. Well, maybe you should ask to a certain extent why people should come to church, but it's not as vital as it is right now of like, I could be doing anything with my time and you'll never know, right? There's literally zero accountability for people popping in and out of a Facebook stream or anything like that. So it's an important thing we want to think about, and it's a scary question. I understand that, and I'm not saying I have the answer for every church, but I just figured it was worth mentioning.
Going along with sorry,
ahead.
Zach. I was just going to say, going along with what Caleb said, we've been doing just a little bit of light analysis of what our audience is actually doing. Right, we're actually starting to look beyond our peak live viewers. We're starting to look beyond some of the raw data that Facebook gives us. And now, we're what, 6-7 weeks into this whole thing. So we're starting to see a little bit of the undulation of certain things start to calm down. So one number that we've looked at, of course, is our peak live viewers. And we peaked on Easter, as probably many places did, right? We peaked on Easter with the maximum number of peak live viewers. And since then, our viewership has been going down, right? As far as our peak live viewers, it's been going down. So looking at that number, I think it's easy, especially for pastors, to say, oh no, what am I doing wrong? Maybe asking some of the questions that Caleb's asking, and maybe starting to say, oh my goodness, like what is going on? What are things that I could do differently that set me apart? Well, we dug a little bit more into the numbers this week, and we have been, like I said, we've had not a huge decline, but a small decline of over the last couple of weeks of 10 or so peak live viewers per week, which is about, what is that? I don't know, 2% of what we're looking at as far as viewership. So not a huge number, but it's definitely something. So we have then now also looked at and I'm looking right after our live, I'm trying to grab the numbers right after our live airs. And while we are live, the amount of time people are spending on our stream has gone way up. So on Easter, it was a few minutes, right? I think it was 2.5 minutes on Easter on average, right? I mean, this is counting people that are just like buzzing by your stream, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So don't take those actual numbers, take them with a grain of salt, but look at the trend. So it was like 2.5 minutes on Easter Sunday. It was 3 minutes on the Sunday after Easter. This last week, it was almost 8 minutes. Okay, here's what that says to me, right? Our viewership is going down. We could be like, Mayday, Mayday. What are we doing wrong? Hey, guess what? People are actually staying with us a large percentage longer. So what that actually says, instead of Mayday, it actually says what we are doing is differentiating ourselves and creating something that people want to stick with. So even though our numbers are down, our engagement is up. The people that are sticking with us over time is up. So I take that as, hey, we're actually doing a pretty good job. The other thing we are looking at, especially as the weather is getting nicer. Right now, we are offering one service time, 10 a.m. Sunday mornings, prime church time, right? And all of us are together, right? We're all together at one service time. We're now looking forward, especially into the coming weeks as the weather is getting nicer, and we're starting to say, okay, if our goal is to have increased engagement and to allow people to engage, and maybe to engage at a time that might not be optimal for us or for everybody, but we are looking at offering multiple service times, multiple synchronous service times to give people a chance. Because here's what I'll say. I initially was not like, I'm like, look, they can watch it when it's live, or then they have infinite options when it's not live, right? Well, here are two things relating to that. Number one, people, if they're going to it afterwards, they're not getting the same online interaction, and it becomes unbelievably less compelling when you're not live. Secondly, we looked at the numbers. We had 13,600 minutes viewed of our service when we stopped being live. 24 hours later, we had 15,000 viewed minutes. 90% of our views are happening when it's live. So even though people do have unlimited opportunities, if it's not directly in front of them, the chances that they're going to go back and either encounter organically or go back and watch it are actually pretty low. So what we're talking about is what are we going to do now moving forward to help people to have more options, to provide an engaging option, to have people in the chat, giving them the Connection Church experience as we're going, and giving them those options. And I want to answer Mike's question on YouTube. Do you think that the audience drop-off could be an indication that the online service is too long? I'll say two things to that. Yeah, maybe. But also, secondly, you may be giving them an indication that if you've given them an indication that you're coming to a close, they're going to start dropping off no matter what. Like and Caleb's given the like, you may inadvertently be giving a signal that you're coming to a close. And we find, I mean, when our pastor says, if he says something like, as we draw to a close, we're going to do this, boom, 20 people leave. Like, I think it's human nature on some ways. But Caleb, do you have something else to say in terms of that?
Yeah, the one thing worth noting, I'd have to check. I'm not sure about Facebook, but I know for YouTube will actually give you a graph of
Facebook will also.
Wonderful. Over time of your peak concurrent viewers. And you can actually see, if you want to feel so self-conscious, it's an awesome way to look through, especially if you make YouTube videos every week. But you can see exactly at what point of the service things go down and things go back up and things move and fluctuate around. What you will notice, and I've been asked this question a couple times just to put everybody at ease, it's going to look right at the beginning, it's going to look like 100, and then it's going to shoot through the floor, and then it's going to move around. That's just people scrolling by your video. Don't worry about that. That you can get caught up in that. Don't worry about it. The rest of the graph is what's useful. It's this fluctuate up and down. And if you have a 15-minute announcement sections for events that aren't happening for 2 more months because we can't meet anymore, and your retention just shoots to the floor, maybe that's not meeting the goals of what you're trying to do right now. Maybe that's not what your audience wants to see at the moment. So it could be a matter of your service be too long, or it could be a matter of there's a certain part of your service that needs to get chopped.
And pay attention to those moments where you do have the engagement spikes in service. For us, we started to introduce moments where the campus pastor will ask people for call outs. The pastor will say, hey, type in the comments. For this past weekend, his starting point was pain or pleasure. Which one do you prefer? Type in the comments which of those. And we had a little bit of a peak, a little bit of a spike. Those kind of interactive moments, if they are working for your audience, be intentional about doing those, not in a cheesy way, but in a way that actually encourages that engagement. Those things will help. And something else kind of to transition here a little bit that we haven't talked about, and as we're talking about post-production and video creation, there are 168 hours every week. Your service is one of those 168 hours. What about the other 167? The 1 hour, or let's say you're like my church and we have 4 services broadcasted every weekend, 4 hours, even still, that's still 164 hours. You need to learn how to leverage content creation to fill those other hours in a way that benefits your community. Is it engaging? Is it inspiring? Is it encouraging? Is it developing that hope for people outside of your weekend service? Charleston Stanley there, he asked about just a smaller church. What's the bare bones minimum work? A great way to engage with people online is your phone. Like if you have an iPhone or a smartphone, the quality of camera, the quality of audio, what you can do with that is increasing. We are in an age, a digital age, where things like TikTok and stories on Instagram and stories on Facebook are some of the most engaging and thriving content that people are putting out. And that's literally content that people are filming on their phones. So if you're looking for a very bare bones minimum thing to do, get in a place with not a lot of bad audio, decent lighting. Make sure you hold your phone up in a way that isn't awkwardly below or above you. Just start to do authentic and real content to your community. Keep it short. Don't sit there for a half an hour. Uh, Make it bite sized. But that kind of content people will really engage with if you're able to just spend a little bit of time into that. Like do pastoral devotions. Invite people to Facebook on Wednesday at 7 p.m. for a little bit of a acoustic worship set. May not sound the best, but if you have that continued connection and you're leveraging outside of that 1 hour every Sunday, that's where you're going to start to draw more and more people to connect with your church.
Yeah, and if I could speak into that a little bit too, because I'm part of that demographic with the small church. We have about 30 people. And so just to encourage you a little bit, the thing that I'm doing every single week just to make sure that the quality and just trying to be excellent every single week is I'm just using one camera mainly. Now our church, we do have access to a 5D Mark III. Now some churches may not have that, but my recommendation is use your best phone or best camera possible. And make sure it's a static and nicely framed. Make sure it's not overexposed or underexposed. What that means is just it's not too bright or too dark. Make sure it's kind of right there in the middle that you can see everyone and see everything. I typically start with a wide shot during our worship service, and then I will move the camera closer or zoom in on my lens so that for the pastor, it's very focused on him and what he's delivering. And I just try to, and in that transition period, I do have a separate phone right next to my camera, and I hit record on that for about 2 minutes while I'm like framing up the shot. That way people online don't see me reframing and that sort of thing. But that is bare bones right there. In terms of audio, make sure that you are either recording something straight out of your soundboard or you're getting as close to the audio source as possible to make it as clean as possible. I've seen so many churches that will just try to use their in sanctuary speakers and have their pastor use the microphone and try to capture it right out of the speakers. Not a good option. All right. I would rather have the mic or the camera closer to your pastor and have him talk right into that rather than trying to pick up, because there's so many reflections and everything that's happening in your sanctuary that your cameras or your iPhone is just not built to do that. So get that source as close to you as possible. I would love to bring Dom into the conversation here. We actually have a question on Facebook, and this is great to kind of recenter us onto our topic today. Dom, what is post-production? Like, what is it?
Oh my God. Well, it is in many ways, people would say it's the art of cinema. It's where everything comes together. You can have all the paint in the world, but unless you put it on the canvas in a certain way, it doesn't become a work of art. So we're obviously, you're hearing a lot. I'm learning a lot. I'm taking notes, but visual language is essential. You start with that wide, you go to that 2-shot, a couple of singles, but unless you really know what to do in post, right? Now what we have is, and this is going to be a very technical jargon, and I apologize, but so long and short of it is, we used to have something called linear editing. You actually had film, right? You would cut it. Now we have something called non-linear editing systems. It's your iMovie, it's your Final Cut, it's your Premiere. And this actually was revolutionary because, again, you could do whatever you wanted. It was absolutely unbelievable. So post, in my estimation, or the simple way I would define it is when you take all the elements, all the pieces, take the audio, you take the visual, and you're able to put it on a timeline, and you're really able to create something, package it for your audience. I love what Caleb said, the who, right? I mean, really be thinking about it. But to me, that shot, that wide, oh my gosh, it's beautiful, right? You're so excited about it. You're taking pictures of you with the jib and everything, but the emotion comes in post, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're laying it all on that timeline, that's where I think you can go from thinking about who it is, but really thinking in terms of creating an experience for your audience. And here's actually a question, if I can turn it around real quick on our guys. One of the things that's been, I attend Connection, right? So I've been watching it and rooting for Dan and loving what he's doing. And one of the things for me that's so big is the relationships, right? So like, sure, I can look at North Point, sure, I can look at Elevation, but like, I love Dan, I love Joe, I feel a connection, but also the quality is amazing. There's a difference between quality and spectacle, right? And sometimes you're going to have a budget for spectacle, but sometimes, I'll be honest, and maybe I'm wrong, I get frustrated with how precious certain shots are. Like, why are we doing this right now? How does this in any way help enhance the experience? I know you spend all that time setting up that jib, but it's not creation, right? And one of the things Dan has done incredibly well is just being true to the service. Like the way, and I'm not blowing smoke, I mean this, like literally, I think that's been something that I've been so impressed by continually is quality. So don't watch, watch Elevation, watch North Point, but sometimes you see it and I'm going, is it necessary? And I know that's a lot, but just be thinking about that, because this isn't my area. I'm not live, right? That's not my thing. I'm just an audience member. But as an audience member, that's at least how I feel when I watch these things.
Yeah. And
I
Nick,
really,
sorry, go ahead, Dan.
I appreciate that, Dom. Thank you. I'll pay you later.
Of course,
those accolades. But just, I want to address a question that came in the Q&A, which goes perfectly with that. And it was Braden Mills said, how much post-production is too much post-production? How much are you guys doing? And I do appreciate what you're saying, Dom. And let me tell you, I'm not doing that much. Like if I'm being honest,
which is awesome.
Like, okay, here's my process. Okay. So I am the guy, like I'm a creative arts pastor. I am the one on staff who's doing the media, right? Like,
oh my gosh,
here we go. Right.
Yeah.
So here's what my week looks like. On Tuesday, we do an opening host segment, right? So this is pre-service. This is what we do for all of our announcements. We've gotten rid of the announcement middle, no man's land where people go to the bathroom and check their phones in the middle of service. Like we don't have that anymore since we're online. So I shoot that on Tuesdays. It's 2 people with a couple of lights, same ones I'm using right now, with holding mics. We shoot it in our cafe. And it's just like one straight take. It takes them 8 takes to do it, but it's one straight take. I also film our kids ministry on Tuesday afternoons. That is much more involved. There's multiple shots and multiple segments and, object lessons and all that kind of stuff. You can look it up if you want. We're Connection Church in Pennsylvania. You can look it up on YouTube if you'd like. We have our elementary services on there as well, so you can see what we're doing. It's not impressive. It's somewhat utilitarian, but we add some creativity to it. Wednesdays, after this webinar, I edit my Tuesdays shots. So I edit our kids service. I edit the host segment, which really is finding the one take, adding a tiny bit of background music. I put a logo at the beginning, and then we have a announcement reel and a little opening highlight reel video that I created. So that segment is about 5 minutes. That does not change week to week. The opening host segment changes week to week. About every month at this point, I am editing that announcement video because look, the information's changing. When I created our first one, we're telling people, hey, go to cometoconnect.com/live. When I filmed that, it didn't exist. So, now we have a better sense of what we're doing, having people ask for prayer, all of that kind of stuff. On Thursday, so that's Wednesday I post-produce. On Thursday, we shoot the sermon and we just do it live. I'm cutting between 2 cameras only live, and I'm overlaying the lower third graphics.
So you cut it live?
I cut it live, yes.
Okay, so with a switcher. So obviously you got the cameras going and you're doing it live with a switcher. What do you then move that into Final Cut? Is everything isolated and recording as well?
No, I'm doing everything like it is. Buckle up. Yeah. We're doing it all live.
Cool.
If we make a mistake, I either have to cover it up or try to redo it. But at this point, we've done everything live. I'm putting in our full screen graphics live. And then I have a video file. Thursday nights, we're shooting worship and we do it one take and we're cutting live. And then on Friday, I come through, I put our opening host segment, our intro announcement, intro video, worship and sermon. I lay it all out. I render it. I'm probably, for our main service, I'm probably spending 4 hours, 5 hours maybe in post-production. That's about it. So it's a blessing, honestly. Like, I've have multiple things, and the kids service takes up much more time. Sure. But because we're doing it in these chunks and we're not trying to overthink it, listen, how much post-production is too much post-production? We can talk about that. Maybe some of the GR First guys can address that. But I'm cleaning up audio. I'm doing color correction. I'm not trying to do anything high budget. I'm not doing a spectacle. I'm
but
getting
the quality's
it done.
still there. Visual language, like you start with a wide, you might punch into a 2-shot with the lead, and then with Pastor Joe, it's usually a wide, and then you punch in. Are you shooting 4K and punching in post, or do you have 2 cameras going?
I have two 1080 cameras. They're old. They're 8 years old probably, and we've got them set up. And honestly, like a couple weeks ago, our framing wasn't as good as I would have liked it to be. But I had to live with it, right? It just kind of is what it is. For the kids ministry, I am shooting on a 4K camera, so I'm simulating multiple camera shots with that by just punching in.
Sure. That's great. Sorry. Cool. Real quick question this week. Sorry, now I have questions. This week, it sounded like there was more in the house, audio-wise. Did you add in the mix? Because I liked it a lot. Again, I was like, is this? Because a lot of times you'll listen to it and the audio is so clean. And it's like you're watching a recording. It's like there's no house. It's like if I'm in a service, I actually hear the mix. You feel it, right? Did you add anything? Did you have a mic in the house to pick that up?
No. One thing that we're actually having a challenge in our audio post production is I am taking a stereo feed off of our recorder, and I'm bringing it into Final Cut, matching it up with the video. And I'm taking that file and I'm throwing some extra processing at it that we can't do live. One of the plugins that I'm using is by Waves. It's called the L3 Ultra Maximizer. And so that's getting my audio levels exactly where they need to be so I'm getting as close to 0 dB in Final Cut as I can. It's the Price is Right methodology of audio mixing, closest without going over, right? So I'm getting as close as I can to that. And the L3 is a pretty transparent way of doing it in one plugin without using multiple compressors and having all this stuff going on. It has revolutionized our sound. So I'm adding an SSL channel for a little bit of light compression and some EQ. I'm adding a stereo imager to give a little bit more wideness to the sound. Okay. And then I'm putting the L3 Ultra Maximizer. All that to say, what the L3 does, because it's pushing all of our levels, which when we mix are all over the place, it's taking those reverb tails and it's accentuating them more. So we're trying to what you're hearing is we're trying to find the balance live. We don't know what it's going to sound like in post. So we're trying to find the right reverb level to where it's not swimming and overwhelming, which if we're doing it to where it sounds good when we're recording on Thursdays, when I get to post, it's just swimming. Ooh. And when we come too far down the other direction, it's too dry. So we're actually trying to find just the right right way to do it. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, no, very cool. Sorry, Tim.
If there was a spectrum of how much live production that a church does, and Dan's like right here, then Grand Rapids First is probably right over here. I think it is worth putting out the caveat that Grand Rapids First is not a one-man band. We're a pretty large church with a pretty good sized staff and multiple people on that know how to do the video production, all that kind of thing. Our services are pretty much done out live. I'll say that like all of our songs are right through, and then we go into we might have a little bit of transition into our announcements and then into the preaching, but it's recorded as if it was live. However, all the cameras are recording straight to the cameras themselves, just locked in to that. And then all of that footage is then taken and given to our wonderful tech director, Gordon Tuttle. God bless his soul. And he shoots it on Thursday, and by Sunday has that finished product, and every single cut is done in post. All the graphics are done in post, all that kind of thing. In addition to that, our worship, the audio, is recorded every single track and then post-produced all the way through. It is, I mean, it sounds fantastic, but it is a lot of work. That there's a second person doing that. That's Pastor Drew, our worship leader, is phenomenal at that kind of thing, but it's all done in post. Our kids ministry, Pastor Troy, he also has a huge background in media and video. He does all of his stuff in post. He records it, cuts it up, puts it together. but he's doing it all himself. The only reason we can maintain this level of post quality is because there's so many people involved that can do all of the things separate, because there's too much for a one-man band. There's too much for a 3-man band. So it's an overwhelming amount, but this is we have the capacity, we have the staff to be able to support that level of post-production. I think if I was to answer the question of how much post-production is too much post-production, and I think there's a lot of different ways you can answer it, to me, it's a sustainability question, really. It's, okay, this is a season and we're doing this now, and we're all in ministry. We all understand that sometimes this is going to go way past our 40 hours, and we're all cool with that. But if the amount of post-production that you've committed to is requiring 60 hours of you, it will continue doing that 2 or 3 months down the line when we're no longer in quarantine. And now you've shot yourself in the foot. So I would say that's if I could answer best I could, is what is actually sustainable without letting all of the other balls that I have flying up in the air drop. That's how I would answer it.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And if I could add on to that as well, first, Dom, thank you for saying all that stuff. You're speaking my language there. I love cinema. But if to answer more that question directly as well, what is too much post-production? If your post-production becomes so seen on camera, what I mean by that is if I watch your video and all I see is how amazing your shots are, and like you said with a jib, if I'm looking at all these shots from a jib and that's all I'm seeing, I'm losing the entire message of the service, the message of the worship and whatever is being preached, and I'm just watching great shots at that point. If I can't say there's a distinct line where that is, but as soon as you cross it, I think you know it. One thing that I love about cinematography, and I've heard it said it this way a couple times, is a good edit is the one that you don't see. And I think that applies very well in live production as well. If I see your cuts or whatever you're doing to make the service look better, my attention is pulled away and out of the service and more into what you're doing rather than what I'm experiencing.
Yeah, that's huge. I think one thing for me, kind of being like Dan, kind of like a one-man team, maybe a couple people helping me here and there, but being a smaller service as well, with like 30 people, typically on Sunday morning when we're back to normal. The one thing that I'm trying to do in terms of post-production is definitely keep it simple, right? I have 2 cameras, but I mainly just use one. And so I'm lining up the audio, lining up the video, and then I'm inserting that second shot when I'm making my adjustments. But then the other thing I'm doing is definitely adding in some graphics. Like my pastor, it was so funny the first week, he didn't really know what to say in terms of like, if he wanted to say, hey, you can give online at, and he said our online giving. And that week I put it there at the bottom for him. And then every week after that, he's like, all right, and you'll see here on the bottom of your screen, he kind of like grew into that. And so, so that was really fun to kind of see that. And his mind kind of opened up to the possibility of what could be done by, overlaying that in post. So taking that little bit of extra time, making sure that you're putting the links there, and fade them up nice and fade them off nice. That way it's not distracting. And then also, sermon graphics. I know there are some amazing sites, not just Google Images. Okay, I would stay away from Google Images because there are some copyright issues that you don't want to run into there. There are a couple free sites, and I'm sure we'll put them there in the chat for you. But the one that I typically use is called unsplash.com. And it's, I don't have time every week to make my own graphics. So I'll just grab a picture that kind of like, kind of goes with the topic that we're talking about, and then I'll just put words across, the sermon title. So like this past week, one of my, I think it was like quarantined and then moving. I'd have to go look. Window of opportunity was last week's. And so just making those graphics that kind of provide a little bit more engagement. And also it helps people when they're taking notes to put up the points one by one. That way people kind of know what point you're at. Bible verses, again, that's a great thing to add. So go back up and answering the question of how much posts do you do, I try to keep it simple. I try to put a basic color grade on there. I do a fade in, fade out with our church's logo. I also, if you use Pro Presenter, you can export. Like I know a lot of people have been trying to, like, take their Pro Presenter and go over NDI and do it live, that sort of thing. I don't mess with that stuff. I just export the slides as PNGs, and then I just place them over top of my edit. And it takes a little bit more time, but my congregation is very happy that I put the lyrics there for them. And rather than typing them in one by one, that's just an easy way you can export the document as PNGs from Pro Presenter. So that's one thing that I do. And then again, I typically just make the slides and fade in, fade out, and that's really it.
I do have two philosophies that I think we would be remiss not to talk about. The first is one from Craig Rochelle, that is Getmo, good enough to move on. We are very often perfectionists, and sometimes we have to be okay if we have a large workload, if we have 2 hours before the service, if we have to export, if we have so on and so forth, just to recognize at some point your return on investment is going to level out, and the more in time that you put into it is going to start to be a negative return on investment.
Yep.
So if you could finish a video in 2 hours, but you decide to take 4 hours to really get that color grade right, or to really try and pull out that lawnmower that was in your audio, or to really, whatever it is, it's important to make the best out of it that you can. But at a certain time, you just have to be okay to say, this is what we need to do, and I have to continue to move this on. Now, that's not to say that quality isn't important, because for me, like, I feel bad that I'm harping our designers and our weekend production teams like so much whenever I'm nitpicking, but there is a point where you can continue to move on. And the part two, and I think we learned this from Dan, and I've heard a couple different variations as well. There's like a triangle trifecta. There's the quantity, quality, and budget. So I've kind of adapted that for Lifehouse, the quantity, quality, and time. At some point Nick's looking at us weird. For Black Bar, we said, what is it? Budget.
Time, budget, skills.
Time, budget, skills.
TBS.
So either way, it's this trifecta. And at some point, you have to, all three are not consistently sustainable. You're going to hit burnout really easily if you try to do for me, I'll use mine, a high quantity of videos that are all high quality and a very quick time frame. I've learned how to do that in a short burst of sustainability, like an Easter or a Christmas, but that is not long-term sustainable. That leads to burnout. That leads to disenfranchisement. That leads very quickly to disconnect from your pastor. It's so important to retain those relationships with your pastor so that you can express, I have too much post-production to do this week. We can't continue to add on more and more. We've got to prioritize.
Guys, this is gold. That is absolute gold. And you're right. I love that thought about, doing it in a burst, and that's okay. And we've kind of made it through that burst, right? And we have to think about sustainability. And I just am loving everything that you guys are talking about, because it's right there. And thinking about how we're going to move forward. What are we going to do? What is sustainable? And, I think it was Caleb that described this scenario, and Nick was talking about, the spectacle and these edits, and people are noticing. Like, I think there are a lot of pastors that really would love to be in the position where people are saying, wow, look at this, please, Lord, give me the quality that I have to back off, right? But in most cases, it's trying to get up to that. But Zach, I love what you said, that there actually is a lot of credence in Getmo, right? In being like doing it so that it's not distractingly bad. Wish we could be at that point where it was distractingly good, but there is this great middle zone where you're not overloaded. If you are the only one doing it, if you are the pastor and you're doing it, if you are a one-man or one-woman production team, I have multiple people who work with me. The post-production is all me, but we're working together in those environments. So where there is some distribution of load, but ultimately when I look at that post, I do have to get to the point, and I'm working with our other staff members for them to help me help them, right? So that where I'm not writing and scripting and setting up and doing my own audio and all of those kind of things, like I'm releasing as much of the content side as I can. I'm asking them to help me help them, especially our kids ministry, by giving me, like, I need you to tell me what the service looks like. I'm in the room recording. I don't really know what these segments are, right? So you have to help me, tell me what the flow is going to be. If we're recording out of order, just help me understand those things. And that's what helps it to be efficient. And that's what helps me be able to serve them for a longer period of time, because I'm not spending hours searching for that video file that was sent to me in a text message 8 weeks ago. You know, I'm getting things in the form that it's a preference for me, right? It's not like I'm establishing exactly what has to be done for everybody, but I need them to help me by helping what works for me.
It's incredibly important. I know I've said it, I feel like 100 times, probably not on these webinars, but I don't think I've met a more consistently disenfranchised group of people in the church world than church media people. Yeah. And I think a lot of that comes down to pastors not understanding, or they have no frame of reference, to no fault of their own, of what it takes to get a lot of this stuff done. And that's why you're there. And that's
now they do.
That's right. Yes. Now, and hopefully that this season is good for that. But a lot of us, you know, we're very thoroughly nerds. We love doing this stuff, and we appreciate the opportunity, but it's so terrifyingly easy to get burned out, and it's not a unique situation. Mm-hmm. I'd put everything I have on every single one of the people in this group have been burnt out on ministry work doing media stuff in the past. Guaranteed. It's super easy to do, and it's super natural, and it requires constant, consistent, intentional communication with your pastor, helping him or her understand what it takes to get this done, and help, constant update of where you are with your bandwidth and whatnot. Because pastors, a lot of times, every pastor I've worked with, they're always aiming on the bigger, the better, the more exciting, and all that kind of stuff. And that's great. I'm a dreamer too. I love to do that. But that sustainability is so important for your own spiritual health and all that you cannot ignore it. And that needs to be priority number one in the situation. It's very easy to get caught up in and switch that thing, and nothing needs to be more important than your personal relationship with Christ and all that kind of thing. So
I would say that goes for pastors as well. Yeah. Like if you're a pastor who is now having to deal with all these things, I mean, in a way, your calling and responsibility is to take care of your community and the people that you have in your church. And if you're also now taking on outside of this responsibility, like this, psychologists are saying that this season is one of the most unique seasons because we all have shared trauma. Trauma is often whenever we're stuck into something, there's nothing we can do to change it, and we continue to move forward the best that we can, not really passing below like a basic hierarchy of needs, right? And so as a pastor, you have to take care of yourself. I know you got to get online, but also you have to start prioritizing what is the most important thing for you to do for your community. You know, are you centering on God in that? And then also, what can you do to grow in the time that you do have? If you're pulling 80 hours weeks every week, you're going to get burnout, which is ultimately going to hurt your ministry more than maybe being online might be. So it's a hard balance, but an important one that you got to make sure you're keeping track of.
Well, one of the things also I think is going to be important is to realize that, your skill set is going to come over time. And the guys that you're listening to have years of experience. So if you ask them, how long does it take them to edit? They may say 5 to 10 hours. And then you sit down and it takes you 50 to 100 to do the same thing. That's okay. It's going to take time. Right now, you need to focus on the Sunday morning service. But I think throughout the week, and Zach, I think you kind of talked about this, there's other hours in the week where content can be made. It's a great space to learn. It's a great opportunity to try some things, experiment a little bit with visual language. I went with this shot, I went with this shot, I tried this. And then also learning how the heck does this stinking nonlinear editing system work? Or how does this editing software work? It's going to take time. You're going to have to build that skill. That's okay. That's good. Don't be discouraged. And that's one of the tough things. How long does it take you to do it? Well, that's Dan DeRozier's. It's, you got Caleb, you got Tim, you got Zach, you got everybody. I mean, it's crazy when you think of the skill set. When I know a lot of these guys. I had some of these guys in classes. I remember Nick's films. I mean, everybody's films are amazing. Come on, I'm not going to compare myself to them. So hopefully we can just try to better ourselves in the time we have, make great content, and hopefully inspire our communities.
Yeah. And it's okay to fail.
There you go. And that's the
It's okay. And I would say it's even essential to fail. Because the failures that we had have gotten us to this point in one form or another. We've learned from that. We've tried it. We put ourselves on a limb. We probably had a bit of an ego crash afterwards, but we're better because of it. So it's okay if you put something out that doesn't do great, as long as you keep learning.
Yeah. And guys, just thank you so much. I mean, our hour, it just flew by. So I'm just so grateful for all of you. Thank you for your perspectives. Guys, remember, you can check out these three, Caleb, Nick, and Zach, over at Black Bar. They're also on the Discord. I'm sure watch any one of their episodes and you'll know how to get over to their Discord with some questions. We also have set up for you, provided by the University of Valley Forge, the UVF Church Media Help Desk on Facebook. We would love to answer your questions there. Also, for those of you who might have questions about post-production, we actually have a media production team at UVF, and our students are etching for something to do right now in this quarantine season. So if you need help, I would love to provide that service for you. Send it off to a couple of students who might be able to give you some ideas or even cut something together for you. We would love to be a part of your weekly service. So please reach out either on Facebook or by email, and we would love to do that. But we just thank you so much for your time today, and God bless you guys as you continue to serve everyone's church and God's church. All right.